Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump fiddles with the One China policy as bargaining chip for trade talks. How ugly can a China-U.S. trade war get? And is Trump's rhetoric a lot worse than his bite? And China's education ministry comes out with guidelines on bullying at school, a problem that has slipped beneath the radar for far too long. We begin today's show with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's latest comments. In an appearance on Fox News Sunday, he questioned whether the United States should keep its long-standing One China policy. This came just a few days after Mr. Trump's tradition-breaking call with Taiwan leader Tsai Ing-wen last week, alarming both Beijing and the White House. Let's take a look.
The outspoken incoming U.S. president caused quite a stir. Again, President-elect Donald Trump has questioned whether the U.S. should stick with its One China policy.
I fully understand the One China policy, but I don't know why we have to be bound by a One China policy unless we make a deal with China, having to do with other things, including trade.
Deal-making might be what Mr. Trump does best, but any deviation from the One China policy might just be a deal-breaker for Beijing. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi warns against moves to damage the One China principle, urging the U.S. to respect China's core interests.
China is paying close attention to these developments. I can clearly say that whether it's Tsai Ing-wen, any other person in the world, or any other force, if they try and damage the One China principle and harm China's core interest, in the end they are lifting a rock only to drop it on their feet.
The One China principle has been a cornerstone of China and U.S. bilateral relations since the establishment of diplomatic ties in 1979, something that is not a negotiating tool. Many worry that Mr. Trump's frequent saber-rattling would push the world's two largest economies on a collision course. Experts have warned the president-elect's apparent oversimplification of a complex and tightly knit trade relationship between China and the U.S. could end up hurting not just their economies, but every stakeholder in the world. Mr. Trump has vowed to make America great again, but sowing uncertainty and unpredictability into China-U.S. relations may be the last thing he wants to do in delivering on that campaign promise.
For more about that, in Beijing, we have Mr. Yang Xiyu, a senior fellow from the China Institute of International Studies. In Washington, D.C., Joe Rubin, the president of Washington Strategy Group and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. In Boston, Robert Ross, professor of political science at Boston College and associate of the John King Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies in Harvard University. Welcome to the three of you, gentlemen. Mr. Yang, here in Beijing.
Thank you.
Taiwan as a bargaining chip, deal or no deal from China?
Absolutely no. China, actually, there are many things the two countries can make a deal on bargain based on the mutual concessions. But however, some of the issues, especially Taiwan issue, is not at this category. Taiwan issue is the core interest. During the past 4 decades, this issue has been always the most important, most sensitive, and the most explosive issue.
So that's the bottom line of
way.
China?
No. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Rubin, why do you think Mr. Trump, the president-elect, push on what both sides have for decades believed in as the bottom line? Does he want to surprise? Does he want to fundamentally change things? Or he just want to test water?
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here. And I do want to start by also stating that the American people have warm feelings for the Chinese people, that what we are watching now in the political rhetoric does not match the people-to-people engagements over years. Personally, my children study Mandarin at a public school. Our public schools support this educational program. So I want to make sure that as we engage in this, that we remember that, because the context for Donald Trump's words do matter. This election season, both political parties raised the negative rhetoric towards China, in particular as related to the economy. It happened on both sides. But what is distinct now is with Trump engaging not just on economic issues, but on core national security issues. And that is a problem. It's very unsettling to have a president-elect publicly stating opposition to a 4 decades old bipartisan policy without a real endgame in mind. So it has much of the national security community very much baffled about where this is heading. Certainly we need that clarity to be sure that this doesn't evolve in a direction that could be dangerous for both parties.
Well, Mr. Rubin, I have to say, thank you so much for being a messenger of friendship, but probably the president-elect doesn't think the same way as you did. That's the problem. Professor Ross, therefore I go to you. Does Washington or the United States, politically speaking, has a mechanism to rein in wild card like your president-elect, Mr. Trump, in terms of its policies? If you have some ideas, help us to understand it.
Well, there are very few things the United States people, public opinion, or Congress can do in the short term to restrain the president when it comes to diplomacy, including such issues as the One China principle, U.S. policy toward Taiwan, toward the mainland. And so before he gets restrained, we may find ourselves in a difficult position. After all, he's appointed many members of the administration who have no experience in dealing with China, dealing with East Asia, dealing with diplomacy. Members of his administration coming from the business sector who are accustomed to getting their way as CEOs of major corporations. So we may go through a difficult period as they learn that other countries have their interests and their abilities, and China can say no. And until that happens, until they learn and gain experience, we may find ourselves with a president who does not exercise restraint.
And therefore, Mr. Rubin, here's the issue. How much both sides have to suffer if following what Professor Ross just mentioned, before the two sides could settle down once again to the original bottom line? Can we afford learning curve like this for a president-elect such as Mr. Trump?
Well, I certainly hope we won't have to suffer, but I do agree with the professor and with the premise of your question that there will be a learning curve. And currently the team that the president-elect has put in, his national security advisor, his secretary of defense, now his secretary of state, it's not at all clear what their views will be on China. And as well, there are real national security dilemmas that are coming up, and they always tend to come up at the beginning of a new president's term. We remember this with George W. Bush as well in the first several months, the incident with the American fighter craft and how that was dealt with a very calm hand in Secretary of State Colin Powell. We're not sure we have those same calm hands right now, and that's the big concern in Washington, is that once one begins to unravel long-standing policies that keep the peace, it's not clear that it has to end in a good place.
Mr. Yang,
so it's critical. It's critical to have these conversations publicly now.
Mr. Yang, if Washington, let's just say President Trump, when he comes into office, want to scrap off this bottom line, does that mean the overall picture of U.S.-China relations from China's perspective is likely to change? Of course, you are not representing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you are not representing the administration here in China, but I want to get you from a Chinese intellect and public opinions perspective.
Well, first of all, if U.S. make the breaking of the bottom line, that means the overall bilateral relation will fall in the totally different state, say, strategic confrontation. That will trigger countless confrontations and contradictions between the two big countries, from the economic, political, even military. And the two countries will return to a new type of Cold War, if not hot war. So under the new Cold War between China and the U.S., whenever U.S. challenge China, that means U.S. is being challenged by China. U.S. being challenged by China. So in the negative strategic interaction, will put not only the bilateral relation but also the regional and the global world in a worse situation.
Professor Ross, can you imagine other governments, when they have the new president, totally scrap off the very bottom line of a bilateral relations, which has been there from day one, and put a total spin to the relations? What would that mean for U.S. when it comes to its capability of foreign policy. Will this, in a way, scrap off the overall credibility of the United States, at least here in China, I have to say, or this part of Asia, about what the U.S. have in mind? After all, it's the president that you have elected.
Well, first of all, I'd like to add a little moderation to this conversation. I don't think we'll be looking forward to a new Cold War in U.S.-China relations. The U.S.-China relationship is very different than anything we saw in the U.S.-Soviet relationship during the Cold War. But to your question, yes, after all, the United States had a very different approach to China under Ronald Reagan, very different approach to China under Bill Clinton. So yes, our presidents have different perspectives as they come into office, and they do seek to add their own imprint on U.S.-China relations. But of course, China has gone through its own successions, and many people in the United States feel that Xi Jinping is very different than Hu Jintao, and his policies in East Asia are very different, and were quite a surprise to the United States, and had a major effect on our understanding of China.
So you're thinking...
Today we're dealing with a president-elect. Yes?
So you are suggesting,
I'm thinking that we have a new president, but it's not that unusual.
So you're suggesting, Professor Ross, that is what the rhetoric coming from President-elect Mr. Trump might be acceptable, even to, let's just say, intellects like you who are dealing with China for long term. So you're suggesting why not? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I said. No, I'm responding to your presentation where you said this is when could it ever happen that a new leader would turn policy? And I'm suggesting that's not uncommon in the world. That's not to say it's acceptable or necessarily constructive or helpful to either the United States or China. That's two very different things.
All right.
What President-elect Trump would like to do is say we need a deal on Taiwan. After all, we had a deal on Taiwan, as you suggested in your opening, in January 1979. The dilemma he faces is that he wants to reopen this deal, renegotiate. The problem he faces is that, of course, the Chinese economy is far stronger than it was in 1979. The Chinese Navy is far stronger. So the idea that we could get a better deal today than we had in 1979, that stretches the imagination. And as I suggested earlier, the Chinese government, the Chinese people are going to be reluctant to make new compromises in the context of a stronger, more capable China.
Mr. Rubin, do you agree with what Professor Ross just mentioned? It seems to me he's talking about the powers of the relations, namely, but not necessarily credibility involved in the trust of the relation. Of course, we lack strategic trust already between China and the United States, but if this, bottom line, is being reopened again, the wound is open to the air again. So I want to fundamentally ask you a question. The relations between China and the United States, does it have anything to do with trust? Will it have anything to do with trust? Or it's totally about power from now on?
Well, I think it's essential to recognize that relations amongst states are always about interests and perspectives and whether or not agreements can be made that advance those interests and whether those can be verifiable. And certainly in the case of the U.S. and China, for example, for many years there was debate about climate change, and eventually we saw both sides come together in a very constructive bilateral agreement on reducing carbon emissions that advances both countries' goals, or at least did in the previous administration. Now the challenge is that with a new administration coming in, like that of Donald Trump, and the types of individuals that he's appointing, is that it will be very different from President Obama's administration. And this back and forth, I understand, it can be very unsettling and very challenging. What we need to make sure we're doing is not personalizing the debates between states. All that said, when President-elect Trump puts out tweets about long-standing policy that does contribute to stability and does not have a backup plan for what's next, it is destabilizing. And it is troubling. And certainly the Taiwan policy does have a lot of support for change amongst congressional Republicans. This is not out of no context, but what is the day after plan? And that's the issue that I'm looking for from this new Trump team, is what is their strategy, what is their day after, what next when they make an assertion over policy. We have real interest with China, issues such as nuclear proliferation in the region, North Korea, the South China Sea, relations across South Asia as well, into Africa. There are major issues that we have to deal with China, and my hope is that we will get through this period of personalization into real discussions diplomatically on hard issues. But if it's pure power alone, that won't cut it. That won't be enough.
It is no secret that some of the members of the Republican congressmen and women might be supporting a very different approach toward Taiwan that has been there for decades. But only this president-elect, running up to the White House, raised that up and totally changed it in a very different direction. That is something new. Meanwhile, policy change from presidents in the United States is not new, and yet dramatic policy change from the president of the United States, particularly for the long run, is very rare, to say the least. So, Mr. Yang, listening to your counterparts coming from the U.S. that have been dealing with China for some time and their reflections about Mr. Trump's rhetorics, what do you make of the wind, the direction of the wind? Is Beijing going to be prepared for it?
Well, first of all, China has a full strategic confidence in one China policy principle in China-U.S. relation. During the past 4 decades, from Nixon to now, there have been 8 presidents from both of the parties with quite a varied political, ideological background and understandings. But the varied presidents have gone along the same one China principle policy. So the 9th president since Nixon, Mr. Trump, I believe, will basically go along this direction simply because that fit to the U.S. national interests. So the American national interests will refrain Trump from going too far away. But on the other hand, we really prepare for the worst situation.
What is likely to be the worst situation? How is China going to prepare for the worst situation, Mr. Yang, if I could borrow some of your wisdom?
Well, for political, economic, and military exchanges, I think will be deadly damaged and reduced. I mentioned that the new type of Cold War. That means U.S. and China, when the total bilateral relation fall in the strategic confrontation, every area cooperation will be damaged and impeded.
The whole taste would be changed. We talk about trade. Both of our two American guests. Let's talk about trade a little bit. Trump has always been harps on the big trade deficit between China and the United States, saying China is stealing American jobs. Let's take a look at some of the numbers. 2015, this year, China exported $300 billion more to the United States than U.S. did to China. He has been talking about that. China has more to lose in terms of total trade volume, but the types of goods it sells to the U.S. are harder to source elsewhere. The 3 largest categories of goods China buys from the U.S. are soybeans, gentlemen, cars, and aircraft, all of which could be sourced elsewhere. The 3 biggest types that the U.S. imports from China are mobile phones, laptops, network equipment. In each case, China is the dominant global supplier, producing about 70% of the world output. So, we're not suggesting there's likely to be a huge trade war, but certainly when you look at the categories, Professor Ross, of what each side have been providing each other, has been interesting. Soybeans directly going to the States, in which Mr. Trump, the president-elect, has won the electoral votes.
Well, I think there are a number of factors here. Your reference to China being able to source elsewhere is, of course, important. But simultaneously, we should also understand that China depends on the American market for its GDP. About 3 times more the United States depends on the Chinese market. So that the level of dependency on both countries in this relationship is fairly significant. I can't imagine that Chinese retaliation against America would be any more damaging to America than a trade war would be to China. So here, the lesson here is not that one country has more leverage than the other. The issue here is that both countries would suffer considerably. And as you suggest, Chinese retaliatory capabilities are quite strong, whether it's Buicks in China, whether it's Boeing aircraft, whether it's agricultural purchasing from the United States. Once again, the last time the Chinese and the Americans had issues in which the United States threatened China with trade sanctions, the Americans found themselves in a very uncomfortable position, and essentially President Clinton blinked before Chinese pressure. Again, as China's economy has grown and its mutual dependence has grown stronger, it's difficult to see how the United States could drive a better bargain and would have greater leverage to compel Chinese compromises.
I see your point. Mr. Rubin, your thoughts here.
Nobody wins in a trade war. We have to be very blunt. And trade wars can evolve into more aggressive dynamics. We do not need to see military conflict between the U.S. and China. Nobody wants that outcome. But part of avoiding any potential for that, as well as a trade war, is to identify areas of cooperation. That said, what the American people voted for, not just in the general election, but really in the primaries as well, and you saw it in the Democratic primary as well, is an economic policy that does deal differently with issues of trade. Now, President Obama had the Trans-Pacific Partnership Program, that deal front and center at the end of his presidency. Both candidates opposed it. That was a strategic move as well by the president. So now it's a big unknown. We don't really know what the policies are. Picking trade wars absent a broader policy is not going to be in either country's interest.
Right. Mr. Yang, before we go, final words from you as well. Trade war hurt everyone.
Yep.
We all know that. But there is a bottom line that both sides have to hold on to. So from now until until January the 20th, rather, how will China react to continuous, it seems, rhetorics coming from the president-elect before he becomes the real American president?
Well, in terms of the rhetoric wordings from Trump, China will wait and see. But words from White House will be the different matter. So China, on one hand, prepare for cooperation, but also make a full preparation for the possible confrontation made by Mr. Trump.
Well, thank you so much for the three of you, gentlemen, for being with us. I feel nervous when I ask you to explain the rhetorics of your president-elect, Mr. Donald Trump. So I want to especially thank the two American guests for generously doing that, Robert Ross and Joe Rubin. Meanwhile, really appreciate Mr. Yang Xi for being with us. Thank you. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. Authorities start a crackdown on school bullying and student violence. Is it a little too late to change attitudes on bullying? Many cases of bullying in China's schools, both by teachers and students, have come to the public's attention through social media in recent months. Education authorities here in China have started a campaign to prevent campus violence. But as a high-profile case in the Chinese capital has shown, the attitude and the response to reports of bullying are a part of the problem. Let's take a look.
Physically assaulted, his face covered in trash. That's what happened to a 10-year-old boy. His mother did not take the bullying sitting down. She shared a letter online demanding an apology from the alleged bullies, their parent, and the school for allowing such a thing to happen. Many mothers sided with her and questioned municipal authorities for sitting on the case and for failing to carry out a fair investigation.
Of course, parents are responsible for a child's action, but more importantly, campus bullying also reflects on teachers, and most definitely the responsibility of the principal.
School bullying is happening more frequently in China. Many students record and post campus incidents online. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. According to an online survey, nearly 90% of 1st and 9th grade students were bullied, and more than half of them didn't tell their parents or teachers.
From the mental aspect, school bullying happens for two reasons: the need to release stress and the study of violence from communities, families, movies, and computer games. In China particularly, our primary schools lack the education of love, telling students to love animals and other people.
School bullying is a worldwide concern wherever children fall prey to campus violence.
It makes me feel sad.
Yeah.
And I be scared.
Yeah.
And I don't like it.
I think it's not necessary to put them in jail. Besides the police deterrence, we can punish them with forced study, restrictions, and even forced work in the community.
China's criminal law doesn't punish minors under 14, and those between 14 and 18 only get light or mitigated punishments. The penalties under the law may be outdated, and it's time to rethink guidelines to prevent bullying and other forms of student violence.
So how do we stand up to bullies in school? We are joined here in Beijing, Dr. Tong Xiaojun, Director of the Research Institute of Children and Adolescents at the China Youth University for Political Science. Also in Beijing studio, Mr. Ron Powell, who is the Chief of Children Protection at the UNICEF office here in China. In the U.S., we have Mr. Roger Dingwei joining us from Nashville. He is the CEO of STARS Nashville, an organization supporting young people in dealing with bullying and violence. Welcome to the three of you. The case here in China, we want to zero in for the moment. And Dr. Tong, at this moment, the school in which the cases were reported still deny there were any bullying ever happened, despite of the apparent clear stresses on the children who have reported about the bullying. So what do you make of this very different perspectives, if I could use that word?
I think just they have different stands, I think. From the mother's point of view, of course, she wants to protect his child. And also she probably has read a lot of things relevant to that topic and then decide this is the school bullying. But the school probably doesn't think so because they use the definition, in their own way. And to me, because, the school teachers or the headmasters probably are not professionals. They use the, they think the persistency is the issue that they deny.
Okay, well, Mr. Dingwei, is there a official definition of what school bullying is, internationally speaking?
Yeah, there's yes, there are several things that seem to constitute what bullying is. Number one, it is indeed an issue that is repetitive. It's done intentionally to harm someone, as well as probably the third and most important issue is it's an imbalance of power or strength in terms of the relationship. And then, as one expert adds, it also creates terror, if you will, in the life of someone who is on the receiving end of being bullied or harassed.
But at the same time, Mr. Powell, in China, the one-child policy is not a secret. Everyone knows children could be receiving more attention than they really deserve, some would say. And therefore, the parents' concern could be understood, but there needs to be a different perspective, really, when it comes to schools or the general society. So what do you make of this very different perspective, at least reflected in the specific case we're talking about here?
Well, I would like to see it broader in terms of, I think we need to look at the rights of the child. And we need to make sure that the rights of the child are protected anywhere, whether that's in school, whether that's at home. And in this case, it's important that schools provide a very safe environment for children, a caring environment for children, where they have the possibility to be listened to have trusted adults that they can talk to. So if there is a case of bullying, that they could immediately report the case to a trusted teacher, be listened to, and also to be able to be at home and talk to the parents about the issue.
But, Dr. Tong, school bullying happened in our days as well. I remembered on campus what happened. We all remembered. But of course, this has become a much bigger issue now than it used to be, with the awareness rising about the protection of children's rights. So, but then there has to be a boundary as to what is bullying and what is not. Of course, Mr. Dingwitt just help us to understand the definition.
Yeah.
But the question is, are schools equipped with the necessary tools, personnel, awareness to do that? How are they going to focus on this job in balance with some of the other priorities they also have in terms of educating a child and protecting a quote-unquote safe environment?
Okay, to me, you asked a very good question, because in our country, the schools probably focus very much on the intellectual development of the children instead of the socialization of the students. That means, the psychological safe and also behavioral, social behavior, discipline, those kind of things, and also self-protection skills, all those kind of things are not on the, on the top list. On the top of the list of the tasks the school deals with.
But you heard those kind of complaints about all kinds of issues.
Right.
That school has not prioritized this, has not prioritized that, but there are only certain things that the school can prioritize about, right? So, but having said that though, let's take a look at some numbers of what's happening on campus. High-profile cases of bullying in schools here in China have raised the awareness of the problem, especially with education authorities. According to China's Ministry of Education, 68 cases of school bullying have been reported from May to August this year. These have to be very high profile, otherwise they would not be notified by the Ministry of Education. In order to tackle the problem, the ministry has released the guidelines to prevent bullying and other forms of student violence in primary and middle schools. Okay, that's in China. But Mr. Dingwitt, in the United States, same. You also have school bullying. You probably have better systems in terms of protection on campus than China has at the moment, but still bullying happens. So the question is how much you have to put in there in order to prevent it from happening to the degree that is going on right now. What about the balance, as I mentioned earlier, with other tasks?
Well, we have similar problems and issues that were just raised about the focus on academics, and we have seen the pendulum swing pretty far towards the academic side here, and now the shift is happening and has happened over the last few years to really focus more on the social and emotional development and social emotional competency development of young men and women, whether it's in elementary school, preschool, or up through high school, and I would say also post-secondary as well. I think one of the things that's maybe the most important for us in the States right now in terms of preventing and intervening in bullying is making sure that we're focusing on the overall effect of the school climate and keeping the definitions of bullying simple, as well as making sure that those young men and women who it's happening to are in fact given supports so that it's already been said, but to reiterate, that those young men and women are getting the kind of support from adults, and that rather than trying to change the behavior of those kids who it's happening to, we focus on trying to increase the empathy and particularly that quality of social emotional competence within the school as a whole, so that we're not just focusing on kids who bully others, but we're focusing on the climate as a whole, particularly the development of empathy and caring and compassion for all children in the building.
Dr. Tong, is that possible at this moment?
At this moment, probably not, because the school are not equipped with professionals or people, staff and personnel who really understand the phenomenon of school bullying.
But I guess it's not a hard issue. I mean, in terms of understanding that we have to have empathy, sympathy toward the others. There has to be friendship among the children, and how to create a better environment for that to happen.
No. It's easy to say and easy for the students to know the words. But then how you can put those ideas into your daily life and your daily skills That's very important, very difficult and very important. And that needs a lot of professional services and training and education.
Right. Well, Mr.
Yes.
Powell, how are we going to
Agreed.
make sure at the same time that we are not overreacting to, jokes between kids, a little bit fights among kids? I mean, that's just natural. We were all enjoying our childhood, and that has been part of the enjoying part when you reflect back. So, once again, the definition has to be very clear. And once again, there has to be very much a close understanding about what exactly is going on among students.
Right.
Yeah, so it's important, again, going back to the definition has to be clear. It's important that awareness is being raised among parents, among students, among teachers, that they understand what bullying includes, that bullying is not just about physical violence, but it also includes relational violence, meaning that you exclude other children, and it could be emotional as well, where you don't see the signs necessarily of what's happening physically, but you see the signs emotionally in children.
But that is very hard to be observed, of course.
That may be very hard.
And that has a lot to do with each individual's own feelings toward the others.
But that's why
what they
professionals
perceived as
are needed.
others' attitudes toward them.
That's right. So because of this, that
if I could
requires
add
professionals to deal with such
How
kind
many
of
professionals
issues.
can we afford on one campus at this moment? China is still lacking of some of the teacher resources in terms of teaching the obligatory classes. So, Dr. Tong, are you talking about something that cannot be afforded?
No. I'm not talking about something like that. There's a policy from the Ministry of Education saying each school needs to have a psychological counselors or teachers. And then at this time, then we can say each school needs to have either psychological counselor or social worker.
Well,
social worker has.
Mr. Dingwood, I'm not sure about this. I mean, in the United States, I know many of the public schools have like a psychological so-called worker over there, but still haven't solved the problem, particularly in some of the public schools. So I wonder, really adding more staff is really the way out.
Well, I couldn't agree more that there's a necessity of having trained professional staff. I do think that one of the core issues is making sure that not only are there professional staff, but that staff development and training for everyone in the building is absolutely the necessity. And in addition to that, I want to go back to a critical point that was just made. The critical difference between bullying and conflict is absolutely essential for everyone to understand. And that's not just true whether there's a professional in the building, that's true for everybody, because bullying is a form of abuse. It more closely relates to sexual abuse, to physical abuse, to psychological abuse, whereas conflict is just an inevitability between children. But training is an absolute core essential for everyone around that particular issue.
Are we talking about this in a glass box? Mr. Powell, as I mentioned earlier to Dr. Tong, that we see China in different parts of the country, very different in terms of the availability of education resources.
Yeah.
Many of those that are in many provinces in China do not even have enough teachers for the specific education, let's just say math class. One teacher has to teach all kinds of classes, ranging from Chinese to math to English to everything, biology. And therefore, is it too much to ask? Is it too much a luxury at this moment for every school to have that specific one in terms of so-called psychology worker or psychology workers? As you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about pragmatism here, Mr. Powell.
I would say, as in many instances, prevention is better than cure. So either China invests in this now, or we'll have to deal with the consequences later. And these consequences could be quite severe. We know that bullying is leading to consequences immediately to the child, but also has very long-term consequences, and that will affect eventually the whole society. So the question is, does China want to invest in that or want to deal with the consequences later, which are often more costly than investing in it now?
Dr. Tong, I want to put the same question once again to you because I think that's an essential question.
Oh, yeah.
For example, many of the schools in China's rural areas, the children there still cannot afford their own lunch. So the state now is trying to provide at least a affordable and nutritious lunch for every child.
Okay.
When you have schools that children cannot even afford their own lunch, can they afford a psychological teacher or a worker over there? How to achieve this in the pragmatic way?
We can find a pragmatic way. That means we train people who are already working in the school to understand what is school bullying, and then if the case happens, and then how you can deal with it, or what kind of support you can provide for both bullies and also bullied. So it's kind of a training, or the idea, the value, and then of course some specific procedures, but you need to spend that time to train people.
It's very important that we're talking about it today, and certainly more awareness needs to be raised across the Chinese society. Tong Xiaojun, Ron Powles, Roger Dingwitt, thank you so much, three of you, for being with us. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night. Thank you so much.